Biakov te maunga, Yadran te moana, Podgra te kainga, Ngati Tairara te iwi, ko John Sumich aho. As Matu said, he'd asked me to talk about matuku, the bittern, and the interest I got in bittern was when I started the Habitat to Hinga project to be able to reintroduce Pāteki into the Bethels to Hinga wetland there. And just walking around and kayaking around the various ponds we have there, you would hear and see the matuku occasionally. Detecting though and monitoring these birds is really difficult. You know, they are hidden. And here's a question: how many people have not seen a matuku or bittern in the wild? And so perhaps a similar number might not have heard a matuku. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. So detecting them and monitoring them can be difficult because of several things I'll get onto. And so in beginning of 2016, because I'd had this involvement with some with drones, I thought, well, why don't we go over them and use thermal cameras to pick them up, because they've got heat signature. They're a fairly big bird, and plus, to date, and even still, the only way of detecting or monitoring bittern is by the booming of the males, and that's only over part of the year during the breeding season. If we could pick up their thermal signature, you could pick up not only the males, but females, even juveniles, and almost at any time of year. So, great idea. Took quite a while to get me funding. I got the then expert on bitterns, Dr. Emma Williams, and together we went down to the Eastern Bay of Plenty and trialled this midwinter's night. One of the things we learned: don't stand out in the cold. Midwinter's night. Yes, we could see at 800 meters a ferret moving through the reeds. You could see pukeko, the non-feathered shield there, stood out boldly. You know, we did see some, later on in the morning, we did see a matuku. And, but that's what we also found, that there are good times and bad times, and the best time is early morning. You didn't need to stay out in the middle of the night, but we found that. We found how high that you could still pick up a thermal signature, how low you could go before you started disturbing the wildlife. We also realized that it's best in the early mornings to use a thermal camera and an optical camera, and we sent 2 drones, one with the thermal camera and then a bit later one with an optical camera, but now it's changed. So Doc then didn't take that any further, they just left it. But in 2021, obviously some more funding or more interest, they did start using thermal cameras to detect the bittern. And but that was with the new technology. It's now off the shelf. You can buy for about 10 grand a drone that's got a thermal and an optical camera, and this is what they were using. They could pick up matuku in the reeds and even nests, but matuku nesting, which is one of the main focuses of DOC at the moment, to work out what's happening to nesting, what is the nesting success, and so finding a nest can be part of that. So this was 2016 that I thought of this idea, and the Aussies are now using the same technology. Slide. Oh, go back a couple, thanks. And that's not one of ours, but that's a drone there equipped with thermal cameras to detect bitterns. The Aussies have got the very same bird. It's the Australasian. We have to accept that Australasian bittern. And so they've got similar problems, except, you know, we don't have foxes, but we've got other things. They're losing their birds almost as fast as we are. So, as I said earlier, the males can be detected during the breeding season, sort of September-ish through to perhaps late December. the males use this boom to both attract females and perhaps to deter rivals. And if you've ever, well, perhaps you have to go on video and see it, but the males will sort of suck in air, they'll suck in air, build it up in the air sacs, and then give a boom, and usually 3 or 4 in a sequence, and then do it again. You've probably heard of the bunyip bird in Australia. Well, this is said to be their bitterns booming. I mean, you can't see anything, you can't hear anything like most of you, and you hear this boom in the middle of the night. It's the sort of thing that the elders would have said, you know, behave, or the bunyip bird will get you, you know. So this boom, though, the production can be heard for up to 2 kilometres. You know, it's carries, it's loud. Now, a lot of people liken the sound to a bull roaring. And Linnaeus, who set up the naming system for plants and animals, he called it Botaurus, and Taurus is a bull, and Botaurus is the bellowing of a bull. And I imagine, though, if Linnaeus had been Maori, he might have said, oh, it sounds just like a kakapo. So it's that same sort of thing, you know, just the air sucked in and just put out with a boom. So then in 2016, I also started this, back one, OK Boomer. This was to try and get an idea nationally of where these birds were, using the male booming as a sort of a different metric to try and find out how many birds there were, making the assumption that where there's a male booming, particularly if it's booming consistently, there might be a female as well. But at the moment, the only monitoring is possible with the males. So this was a nationwide thing I set up for in 2021. The Aussies did it the next year as well. So then, because DOC, I'd spoken with people in DOC, and they were saying that no recovery group for this bird was, you know, thought of. DOC was more interested in habitat protection rather than individual species. And so when I said to Scratch that, well, actually there's no more threatened habitat than wetlands, there's sort of silence, you know. So I knew of several other groups, non-governmental groups, that were doing some serious pest control and monitoring. And so a group of us got together, and we're just forming at this very moment the Bittern Conservation Trust. And that's to try and improve the lot of bittern. Our trust is committed in attaining its purposes, this is from the trust deed, to ensure the stabilisation and subsequent increase in the breeding population of matuku-hūrepo, the Australasian bittern, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that's its main purpose, grand. We sent out a survey to more than about 100 people, got 80 responses, all but one saying, yes, we do need a bittern support group, because it is, you know, lagging behind in interest and support. And a survey had a whole lot of questions, but the 3 priority areas: raising awareness of bittern, using consistent monitoring and recording methods, and connecting individuals or groups to regional or national organisations for support. So, Vic, thank you. So that's one of the first things that we've come up with. This is a slide that was developed with some input from DOC. Harry Cayley is now taking up the Bittern Challenge. And this is an app that is to be, you know, DOC are going to be using it soon, and we're hoping that regional councils also will. The regional councils have a more of an obligation now to monitor a lot of their rare and threatened species, and this will make at least checking bittern a lot easier. This is modelled a bit on the Kiwi Call app that's been used, but it can be used either just for one-off sightings or booms. It can be, you can put in your automatic recording device records into it. You could have a coordinated human hearing and use it even for triangulation. So, and there's a privacy thing on it. If you don't want to state where you heard this bird, because some people don't want others to know that they've got kiwi or bittern or something, you can sort of just anonymise this stuff, so the data is only able to be read by the right sort of people. So that's one of the first things we've got. Well, it's now live. You can go on lovebittern.com and pick up that app and start playing with it. I hope to use it soon at our Matuku survey, which is coming up soon. Yeah, so bitterns, now there's a couple of pretty pictures. The bitterns, they're an obligate wetland species. That means they can't live anywhere else but in a wetland. They're the apex predator in a healthy wetland. They were until the Maori was disturbed and a few other predators came in. They're cryptic with superb camouflage, one of the reasons why most of you have never seen one. And they're highly mobile, so they've been satellite tagged as going over 350k. And they can do that fast. So the bird you see today, or don't see today, could be, 100 k's away there. So that mobility, can often be related to food sources and that, And it is, I know one of the correspondents in the Hawke's Bay thinks their birds don't go so far because they've got better food sources. Okay. So there we go, lovely matuku, and thank you. Yeah, that's its favourite food. Next. So that's the sort of wingspan, that enables it to go all that distance. And of course, it is Australasian, so really it got here as welcome swallow, as piwaka waka, as a lot of our birds. They're, wind-borne from Australia, more or less. Pukeko, of course, is the same as it is all the way from Africa through India as well. So then, why so few of them? Okay, loss of wetlands is the first thing. New Zealand has lost over 90% of the wetlands that were here. It's even worse, for example, in Northland, where apparently we're down to about 3% of the wetlands that were there. Predation. So predation, thank you. The usual suspects, and to that you can add dogs, which might not, they perhaps don't eat the eggs or the chicks, or perhaps even the adults, but they certainly harass the birds, and these birds are very sensitive at nesting, and so they'll easily move off. So, starvation. So with the decrease in the quality of water and food sources, these birds are often starving. Some of these birds that are picked up on the next thing, roadkill, is, they're found to be quite anemic, deficient in their marrow. They're starving. And although you can see them like this, apparently these have been sent to analysis and shown to be quite in a bad state. So there's not enough food for them. And that's related to the quality of the water, the pollution in the water, the turbidity. These are birds that hunt by sight, and if you've got turbid water, you're not going to see too much. So then, we can try these signs there to, one more. The birds can't read, we hope the drivers can. But I just found the other day that these signs you can apply to put up, but generally speaking, it's after at least a kill or two, and you're required to pay for them. This is an NZTA approved sign, so you pay for the privilege of getting it printed. NZTA will GPS it, and after that, councils apparently are required to sort of upkeep it or replace it if it gets knocked by a car or whatever. But just talking with our secretary for the Bittern Conservation Trust, who also worked on the Kiwi Coast Trust there, a lot of people up north are proactively putting in Kiwi signs, and they're getting around this by putting such signs in private land, just on their side of the fence. Yeah. And getting back to the starvation issue, if the birds are often going to feed on roadside drains, where there might be something there, and then of course from the roadside drain they'll hop onto the road. And someone was saying that she thought these birds were taller. Well, one of the things they do in their sort of when they're hiding or sort of a fright situation, they'll just go straight up, the beak up like that, and they do look taller when they're like that. This is their sort of more mode when they're hunting and that, but yeah, they're a big bird when they stand up, like all of us. Yeah, so their habitat then, large wetlands provide most of what they need. Also salt marsh and riverine, and even in paddocks. So next. There again. So there you can see one little matuku, but also you pick the pukeko there. Yeah. So they'll go onto paddocks, particularly after rain, because they'll perhaps feeding on the inverts that come up. The normal feeding, of course, is fish, small fish, kura, and tuna. So you've seen a couple there with the tuna wrapped around them. If any of you have ever tried to get a tuna off a hook or anything, you'll know what it's like. The slime is everywhere. Well, these guys deal with it by having a special powdery down on their flanks, and they rub their beak on the down, and then they can the down, the powdery stuff will stick to that slime. And then on the middle toe, there's a sort of a serration that they use to comb all that crap off. So very, very clever. Breeding, they can lay up to 5 eggs, but nesting is very sensitive now to disturbance, and so unfortunately, we know that some of the cameras that have been put by some of these nests to record what's happening, what might be predating them, that can lead to predators coming. I mean, having a camera by a nest is, perhaps fraught. So it's going to be a tricky thing. I think Doc have to sort of look into why the reasons of decline in the sense of what's happening with the breeding success if you alter that success by putting a damn camera there in the first place. So from the first slide they are saying that looking after a bird, and this bird needs wetlands. It needs keeping what wetlands we have and expanding those, making new wetlands. Trying to extend the argument and saying that such a thing is good for the land. So can that be good for the land? Okay, let's have a look. That's not good for the land, nor that. And you can't see much there. The invertebrates, kura, everything swept away in floods like that. So obviously, as Hemi was saying, we need to sort of plant, and it's not just any old trees or plants. A proper non-invasive species put around water edges. And I would even argue that harakeke, perhaps, where you've got streams that have significant water velocity, isn't necessarily a good thing. They have a relatively shallow root system, big sail area, water velocity, and out they go. We had that at Matuku Link. A lot of big mature harakeke was just ripped out. So, we advocate more of the pure, the carricks and the sedges and that close to the edge. Their root systems intertwined, a bit like bamboo, but not invasive. So that's a good idea. So all this, here's one from Matuku Link. That's a before. And this is an after. The water is still there. So, cooling the water is important, and that's where the shading occurs. This is a start, the smaller stuff, but the trees shade that water, cool it, and that's more important for all the invertebrates and the fish. The riparian planting reduces some of the muds, the silt, and also some of the other chemicals that might be coming. It captures some of the nitrogen that will be coming from the stock or from the fertilizers. Improves fish habitat, and that's good, but it also is good cover for bittern as well, because they like hunting along the edges. Hūrepo is prime for bittern, and so particularly good, thank you, for their nesting. Yeah, they'll nest in other places, but they really love hūrepo for nesting. So, is it good for biodiversity? I'm talking now about if you're doing things that are good for matuku, this riparian planting and extension of wetlands, then is it good for general biodiversity, as Matu alluded to earlier on? So, there's pueto, the spotless crake. They stalk around everywhere. Invertebrates of various sorts. That is, hopefully there's no entomologists here, but that's a mayfly of some, apparently a different one, strange one, an unusual one. Matata, the fern bird, and of course it's also good for the fish. That's one of our galaxids. So next then, really stretching the argument here, you know, is it good for climate? Well, worldwide, wetlands represent only 3% of the landmass of the Earth, but they store twice as much as the carbon as all the forests. So 30% of carbon, land-based carbon, is in wetlands as opposed to 15% in forests. Coastal wetlands can store up to 55 times as much carbon as forests. So they're important. The issue with wetlands, you know, they take in the carbon. They're also taking in nitrogen oxides. If they're warmed up, though, in a warming world, all this is reversed. So this carbon sink and this nitrogen sink becomes a source. So you can get methane coming off, you can get nitrogen oxide coming off, you can get carbon coming off. So draining swamps leads to what had been stored allowing it to go out. So not only are you losing the depth of soils by draining swamplands, previous swamplands, you're releasing a lot of the gases that have been trapped there. I mean, when you've got a paddock, that carbon gets taken off on the wool or the meat. Hūrepo just stays there, and it just it dies down, and a new lot comes up. So all that is a store, which of course is what happened. You know, we're burning coal and we're burning oil, which was previous historical collections of plant matter. So, yeah, riparian planting, looking after matuku, I'll argue is good for biodiversity, good for the climate. And now we're going to really stretch this one. Okay, so thank you. The next slide there. This came out in, I think, the Observer or something last year. So in Britain there, read that, but the idea being that a premium could be put on retaining peatlands and wetlands and that, okay? And then just this year, reforming the emissions trading scheme so that it recognises all forms of carbon sinks, not just forests, but also wetlands. So to get credits for for carbon there, you need a big amount of forest. You probably need a lesser amount of wetland to claim that, because we certainly at Matuku Link know the value of forest versus wetland in terms of a thing called transferable development rights. We were able to buy Matuku Link, which was just over $2 million, and paid it off in 3 years because of a thing called transferable development rights, where you preserve forest, thereby you have foregone forever the subdivision of that forest, but it takes about 8 hectares to qualify for 1 unit, whereas it only takes about half a hectare to qualify for that same thing for a wetland. So that was a monetary sort of thing, but bringing in this emission trading, you know, storing carbon in wetlands, as you've seen from the examples before, you're actually storing more in a carbon in a wetland than you might in a forest. So that's practically what I was talking about, trying to stretch those arguments of the value of matuku and wetland biodiversity and all that. I've just been permitted by Claire, I'll say, to, as a final thing, just as a plug, a commercial plug for something we're flogging off for our project, Matuku Link, the first anti-bird strike window stickers. Now, this is something that we sell. It's the only one you get in New Zealand that's got native fauna on it. So put them up on your windows and stop the loss of other birds just by whacking into your windows. Thank you.